my posture right.
I'm getting nervous. It's weird.
Yeah. Nope. And we're live. Ooh, and I'm in the pole position now.
Whatever.
Stage left.
All right, Denee, you ready?
Yes. Let's have some fun.
Ready to do it
Yes.
this time?
Yeah.
She's like, please God.
Please God, I want to get this over with now. For
Everything
You
works
idiots.
today.
No, we're
We're
gonna.
T-shirts that say "useful idiots."
On this episode of Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered, we talk about the Department of Justice, their statement of interest. Our guest met with the Department of Justice. We're going to talk about that. She also shared her time as a bank teller with a bank robbery. It's going to be a great show. Tune in. You talk about it privately. We talk about it publicly. This is the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast. Welcome again to the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast. I'm your host, James DeWiggins, along with my co-host, Crazy Uncle Keith.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Robinson, tell us about Denee Evans, the CEO of CMLS.
Yes, this one, man, I don't know if we've covered more ground. I'll just run
lot.
through what we talked about. We've got James in a Superman costume. We have bank die packs when you rob a bank. We have Denee on, who actually talked to the Department of Justice and what she learned. We covered the importance of being a fiduciary, what happens to MLSs in the future, and so many other great topics. This one's packed with information, kids. Put it in your ear.
Yep. Denee, welcome to the podcast. We are super excited to have you here for a second time, ironically. We had lots of internet connection issues when we originally tried to do this.
Well, Denee, this is a safe space. We weren't looking to blame anyone.
I'll own it.
Just is something that happened.
So she didn't feed the hamster. It wasn't spinning the wheel, and the internet died, and it got a little funky. So we're back for.
They were great screenshots, though.
And some great screenshots. That's accurate.
We had you smiling, we had you crying, and we had you pontificating, all with some great screenshots, which we'll have to
Not share.
throw in. You're right. We won't
Please.
share those. So
Not the crying one. The smiling one was good.
I would just like to point out today that I am officially Keith Robinson. So for those of you who want the mugs, they're
sir. You wish.
that is true.
Please send me
That is
one.
very true. Yeah,
will.
we're gonna. You'll get a bunch of bunch
Okay.
of swag sent to you. So don't you worry. So
Yeah.
Denee, so thanks for coming back to do this again. We were having lots of thoughtful conversations, which we'll do today. So I guess let's do this for the listeners and viewers. Just tell them real quickly a little bit about your background, your current role, how you got to the position that you are, your path to where you are at CMLS, and then we'll do some rapid fire questions and then dive into all the heavy conversations we'll have today.
Sounds like a good plan. Thanks for having me. Thanks for trying again today.
Of course.
I am excited to chat with both of you. Denee Evans, the CEO of the Council of Multiple Listing Services, which is the national trade organization for MLSs. This will be my 10th year, which I can't believe. And time flies when you're having fun and being crazy. So,
Especially the last 24 months.
yeah,
Super fun.
yeah.
Yeah.
But my background is I started actually in banking and finance as a teller at Bank of America. So I have worked on the finance is my love, numbers. I worked at Wells Fargo. I did credit union time, financial planning. I also worked at Countrywide, which usually I see people cringe, but I did 10 years of mortgage lending. I know.
So 2008's your fault?
Yeah.
That's basically-
I remember that day when I got the call when things were going really sideways. It was crazy. And then I was a little bit late bloomer in getting my college degree, my bachelor's. And so I did that when I had a 2-year-old. And by way of that, there was an internship at a nonprofit who was working with energy efficiency in real estate. And they brought me on to help set up loan funds for the state. And that led me to where I am today because it was working with data on real estate.
I have a very important question. I got to go first. So you mentioned in passing that you were a teller. So did you really have those die packs? Like when people rob a bank and did you really have those? Like, is that a thing or is that just?
So I've been out of banking for a while, but when I was there, it was totally a thing.
What?
The die packs. Yeah.
It was? Did you ever never mind. I don't want to know if your bank got robbed, but like
It did. I don't want to
Did it
talk
really
about that
explode
because that's traumatic. But I've never seen a die pack go off.
oh, dang it. I mean, dang it on the die pack. Sorry about bringing up the core memory of
It's
trauma.
intense.
We'll go right past that.
Wow.
James, you had a question, I hope?
No, I'm now intrigued by this whole bank robbery thing. But we'll not do the
Technically,
PTSD
the
thing
armored
today.
truck outside of our branch. So, but still, it's all kind of crazy
Man.
stuff.
All right, we'll move on from it. But that's, by the way, we're gonna have to have that conversation over a cocktail at some point when I see you next.
Yeah.
But you did mention something as well before we dive into our rapid fire questions, which I thought was an overachiever comment, but you kind of just slid right through it. You got your bachelor's degree and you had a 2-year-old. Like,
Sheesh.
I don't know how. I have a 3-year-old, and I every day I'm just like, I don't know how people do it. So
That
like,
should count as two
Yeah.
bachelor's degrees.
Seriously.
Get a dual major.
Dual major, yeah. No, it's I think that just speaks to you can have goals in life, and sometimes when we feel there's a point we should have them by, that doesn't always line up with the universe's plan, but they can still accomplish them. So got it done, and I think it was a great example for my girls because I had a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old, so they both got to go see mom graduate, and
good for you.
That's
Like,
awesome. And people's timelines are bull stuff anyway.
you
Like,
can say bullshit. It's gonna happen.
I know, but I like to let you do it.
Reverse psychology, Denee. He does this all the time.
My mom listens. So
hi mom.
Yeah.
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 Mom.
So let's do some rapid fire questions, and then we'll get into the heart of it.
Dibs on the
So,
first one.
Go,
dibs on the
go,
first
go,
one.
go.
Okay. If you were a superhero, who would it be and why?
I think it would be She-Ra, Princess of Power.
Solid. So She-Ra, that was like He-Man's buddy, right?
I think it was
that right?
cousin or sister. I'm not quite sure the relationship, but yeah.
Castle
He's-
Grayskull, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She-Ra, Princess of Power.
Can we just talk about how old we are
Because
now?
half the audience is Googling that.
The millennials
Yeah.
are Googling it right now going,
Good.
what the
Good.
heck is
And then
Yeah.
watch it and do it on Saturday morning with a bowl of
That
soup.
was
Yeah.
Saturday mornings, right? I had to do my
I know.
chores.
It will
And
change your
He-Man,
life.
She-Ra, right after each other. And by the way, want to get really... It was Voltron was in there somewhere too. So
Yeah, but that's totally different.
I know. My point was it's all that time frame. That's
but I
all.
can share with you
So
too.
accurate.
If I had a second one, it would be I have a shirt that has the S for Supergirl on it. And I wear it, but really that is more to remind me I'm actually not a superhero and I can't actually accomplish all that craziness. So it's like a little bit of a reality check. Of,
There.
It's
like a joke.
reminder.
So-
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good.
I wore a Superman outfit once, but then people looked at me at how skinny I was, and they didn't get the joke. I just wanted to tell you that. That was a Halloween costume one year.
Oh,
We have
they
not
might
been
not have
drinking
got
on the
the
show.
joke.
I've only drinking kombucha today. So,
Yeah.
anyways, let's move on. The next one,
everyone's
Denee.
stuck on seeing you in a Superman.
But no, it just let that visual sink in for a second. It's pretty funny.
I will find that photo and put it in the show notes if I can.
You
Yeah.
can.
So stay ready.
Favorite book or podcast this year and why?
I think it's a classic that I've read and try to revisit, but Aladdin Factor, How to Ask For and Get What You Want. I think it was a pretty fundamental book I read years and years ago, and I just think it's nice to revisit it. So I'd recommend that. Easy
Interesting.
book.
That's a good one. I haven't read it, but I've heard about this, and I just relating it to it. It's so often where you just, if you don't ask, fear of rejection is what stops everybody from doing everything. But if you don't ask, you're never going to get the no or a yes. So, it's my motto is just keep asking until they finally just say yes, because there's a certain point in time where people just get annoyed.
Persistence pays off.
Yeah. So I use this story of Errol Samuelson is on our podcast, and he was going to listen to this now, but he didn't want to come on, and we've been friends. It's kind of a joke, but I just went around him
you
and
asked him, he said no.
like 5
You asked him
times.
again. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I
Not
just
like,
went.
oh, we'll see. Shoot me an email.
No, he's like, no, I just don't want to do it. And I was like, why? He's like, I just don't want to do it. I was like, okay. So I went around him and got somebody up above him to actually put him on the podcast. It was great. So,
Yeah.
anyways, persistence.
As you can tell, we like a trust environment for our podcast. Okay, last question. If you could have lunch with one person, current or historical, who would it be and why?
I think it would be my grandma Walker. is actually grandma. Her name was Pearl Varnell, and my oldest daughter is named after her. But loved my grandma. She was amazing. I got to live with her for a little bit. She's now passed, but amazing human who I love dearly.
That's awesome.
That's a good one. We had a few people do that and say that.
We've had a few grandparents. This must be something about that connectivity between a grandkid and a, like, probably because they just give you candy and say
exactly.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like yes day when they're around.
Yeah.
And so as a kid, you're like, man, you're amazing.
You're the greatest. Just gifts. And
any parent tells you the best part of parenting is grandkids. So that special relationship, and she was amazing. Part of my life.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So, all right, let's dive in to all the questions because you've had, and we'll get there, but just kind of setting this up, you've had some really interesting discussions with some important entities, including the Department of Justice recently. So we'll go through a little bit of that. But first, just for context, because we didn't really cover this, talk to us about CMLS, just, what it is, what you guys are doing, its purpose, all of those, just to give a little bit of a setup before we dive into all of the meat of this conversation. So,
as I mentioned, CMLS, or Counsel Multiple Listing Service, is the trade organization for MLSs. That is all we do and talk about is multiple listing services. We have members in the U.S. and Canada, and I think most people know, or maybe they don't, that there's about 532, I think is the number of MLSs in the U.S. And of that, we have 231 MLS members. But those 231 MLSs report 1.8 million subscribers. So it is a majority of the market. And granted, that is both U.S. and Canada. So our coverage is most of the MLS's subscribers in the U.S. CMLS was founded in 1957, and really what that was about is the Northwest Council of MLS. They were coming together to talk about, here's my challenges, here's the solution I found, here's all the different things that we're working on, and coming together to find solutions and evolve and advance the industry. What's the innovation happening? What are you doing in your organization? So that has grown to today with those 230 members, and we continue to do that. So we have an annual conference in September. We have training courses. We have webinars. Just continue to bring MLSs together, how they better support both the brokers and the agents, and then the consumers in which they serve.
You also went to, just recently, I believe you and Sam DeBoard went to France, to Paris, to the International MLS Forum.
How come I don't get invited to stuff like that?
You got to be part of it. I mean, like,
that would help, wouldn't it?
Anyway, the step in the process. But the reason I asked that question is because you've got this is U.S. and Canada, but really other countries are starting to try and wanting to figure out how this system that's been built here can be deployed elsewhere. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's something that us here, we call it the North American model because it's US and Canada. That really doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. And I think part of some of the other things we're going to talk about is the lawsuits, or DOJ keeps comparing us to those other places. But it's like comparing apples and Vovos, right? It's two completely different things. It doesn't make sense to compare them. And I think
well, sorry to interrupt, not only does it not make sense, from what I heard you say, is those other countries are looking to us to try to figure out how to be more like us. And, the DOJ or whoever, the lawsuits are using a comp for something that's inferior.
Exactly. Take us backwards.
Crazy. It's insane.
They just, the question I kept getting was, how do you get your members to cooperate and share their listings? Because when it's there, you have to go to every single broker's office to find out what available inventory there is. And in addition to that, the other really common question I had from all these other countries was, how do you enforce the rules? How do you make sure the data is good and accurate? Because there, a house can be listed for sale forever. And even when it's not, just as like a marketing promotion, right?
Yeah, just to get the phone ring.
And so just consumers are not having information. The professionals definitely don't have the information. So we got a pretty cool thing here that is super pro-consumer. And we need to be very careful.
And other people want to embrace it. And and literally you're like there to show people how to do the very thing that the DOJ is wanting to change. So I remember, this is going to date myself just for a second, but I remember, because my family's been in real estate since 1967, fun fact, and I remember the MLS book. Yeah. I remember when it went to a DOS-based system called Boris. I'm now dating myself. And it was a wild west. Like you had to. The book was published once a month. My parents would go down on a Tuesday. They called it multiple to go get the new book and talk about the new listings. But again, stuff could be in contract and gone by the following month, and you're running around, driving around. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you'd take the book back to your office, and then I wasn't in the industry then, but I remember hearing stories. I'm not quite that old. But like if it was a really hot one, someone would rip it out of the book so that they would just like tuck it in a desk drawer. Like, that's what we were dealing with prior to having MLSs and some sort of, I mean, maybe it's not a standard process. There's a lot of MLSs and a lot of approaches to how to get the same thing done, but a strong desire to make sure that the human being who is looking for a house can have accurate, up-to-date, and current information. And then the other humans who service them and make sure that they have this great experience have access to current, accurate, and real-time information. Yeah. Like, that shouldn't be... We shouldn't be moving away from that, right?
I think that's one of the really important roles the MLS plays, that again, it's not the like cool stuff, but the data accuracy, right? Making sure that data is the gold star standard and accurate, timely, and comprehensive marketplace information. Mm-hmm. It just, it's the dirty work, but it's the important work that really makes it valuable and allows individuals to make the most important decision of their lives, of this investment into a home.
So being able to see that on different websites, all the big portals, and knowing that information's accurate and updated and timely so that you're making the right decisions is a big piece. Let's segue that. So the Department of Justice issued their statement of interest in the No Select case and basically said, nah, doesn't go far enough, which I'm going to simplify it just for everybody's context. So basically, the part of the deal was that there would be zero in the MLS, which has been this new, topic of conversation of not requiring any
$0 for
correct $0 of offer of compensation, and they're basically saying it doesn't go far enough, and they're using the Northwest MLS as an example. We won't get too deep into that, but the DOJ came out pretty strongly and wants to see a decoupling of compensation. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, and you're more involved in this than I am, but essentially they want to see this offer of compensation removed from the MLS. Is that a fair assessment of everything so far, or where am I off? Let's do
So I think what DOJ wants is a couple of things. If I just back up from there.
Please go.
One, I think my notes are they would like to see a more educated and informed consumer from their version. I think the industry, we believe that they are educated, they are informed, and I think the DOJ wants to see something a little bit more specifically around commission. And I think they would also like to see that the consumer is having a earlier and slightly different conversation with their agents, both on the buy side and the sell side, about this commission. And so I think that statement is sharing what the DOJ believes would be the solution and the way to achieve that. And I think that's where CMLS and we disagree with the way to solve that is what they've proposed. And I also believe CMLS, and as the industry continues to evolve and innovate and do new things to meet the needs of the consumers. And I think there's an opportunity for us to provide some solutions to their problems. But yes, James, in there, what they describe as their solution to accomplish what I think their goals are that they've laid out for us is by having it decoupled or removed from the MLS.
And you actually met with the DOJ, right?
We did. CMLS, we started a campaign called Champions of MLS about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, to where we wrote a white paper gathering all the information and all the cases over time.
We'll include that.
Great.
We'll make sure
that on there. It just brings all the places where it's been talked about and documented the value that MLS plays in being pro-competitive and pro-consumer. So we completed that, and then we reached out to the DOJ to say we'd like to meet with you to share this white paper and talk about what are the potential evolutions of our industry and how do we remain and advance being a pro-competitive, pro-consumer environment.
And they were just cool, come through? How does that work? You just fire off an email to the DOJ, and then do you meet in some windowless room and they put the light in front of you. Like,
No,
how does
we
tell me what goes into
hired
that?
some antitrust attorneys. Actually, they were previous DOJ and FTC attorneys to help us navigate that and to assemble this white paper and just to build that relationship with DOJ to engage in that conversation, to say we do have our members, they're looking for us to share what would be potential evolutions and changes that we could look at to better serve consumers. And so they said yes to having a meeting with us, and we did that back in December.
All right.
In person, though, was it like a big federal building? Was it like Law and Order?
Or was it just
It was a Zoom meeting.
Like, I want to know.
I know.
Did they at least have cool backgrounds or something? No?
I think they were regular
Have
backgrounds.
the DOJ seal. Okay.
They were regular backgrounds.
So,
But it was really good that we had great engagement with them. There's lots of discussions and questions, and I feel like it was a productive conversation. And I think some of the things we were asking them or saying is, a better understanding what their concerns were, what was the issue, talk through like we didn't propose any solutions, we just wanted to better understand. But I think that's one of the really great things about this statement of interest that they did file, is that we haven't seen that. It's not been clear and in black and white is what is it their concerns are, and what is it that they think are possible solutions that we could even start to discuss and engage in some activities.
So let me, I read that thing 3 times. Keith has read it
Zero times. But
yeah.
I talk to you about it all the time.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like I read it.
I've read that thing 3 times, and I've found some really interesting verbiage in that statement of interest. So they mentioned steering quite a bit in a few portions of that document. I think I'm making an assumption again. I didn't talk to them, but just reading what they wrote, they're worried about steering. That especially, and I'm going to couple this with also reading the Consumer Federation of America's paperwork, what Brobeck's putting out there, which is also, differing opinions, but thorough in a lot of its own research. I think my take is they want buyer's agents to have a conversation with a buyer, agree on compensation up front, regardless of the property, in advance of looking at any homes. So that here's what I'm willing to pay you. And then every property you look at, it doesn't matter whether there's compensation there or not, that essentially the buyer and buyer's agent have agreed. That's the decoupling part. Some interesting comments that I've noted was they actually stated in there they didn't have an issue if the purchase contract is written in such a way where the seller pays the buyer's agent's compensation. That was actually called out in that document. So it seems to me what they're really, just reading between the lines, that they're really focused on this steering idea. And I guess my question that I'm asking you is do they, there seems to be like there's steering and incentivizing. They're 2 very different words with very different definitions in the dictionary. And I'm concerned they don't understand the difference about what is steering versus what is a seller making a choice to do something to incentivize a buyer to buy their house over someone else's, which I'm going to make the statement because I'm sure someone will listen to this. The entire fabric of the American economy is about incentivizing. Literally, like,
well, new home sales do it all the time. Like, this is very common. Yeah,
you could do like you get a cheaper rate when you buy the car from that car dealership versus the other car dealership. Those are incentivizing versus steering. They're 2 different things. I'm saying that. What is your read on this?
Well, I think one, just to call out the distinction between steering of what they're talking about and what I think a lot of us in the industry think of steering based on discrimination. And so why I want to call those out, because I think it's a very important point that steering, by doing what I believe we're reading in this paper of removing it from commission from the MLS, and potentially even how some of these changes could be how the commissions are paid and by who, I think does impact the people that we're worried about the steering based on discrimination. I think they're going to be the ones. But when DOJ is talking about, they're talking steering based on the commission. So they're looking for ways to, how does that change where it is in the MLS so that it can't an agent couldn't steer to homes that are paying higher commissions than another. That's their concern that's their version of steering. But I think where I'm very passionate and advocating for what we talked about, the value of the multiple listing service, is let's double down on transparency and information. If we take it out of the MLS, that doesn't mean it's not going to happen somewhere else, right? So you're professional, right. You're still going to get paid. And so rather than remove it there, let's double down and say, there was that change a few years ago that it gets published out. So consumer even knows what's out there, right? So let's double down on that. Let's do more discussion about what maybe that is.
Disclosures,
like
good thing.
Let's continue on what that core is. Those other countries are trying to build. The more data, the more information, the more accurate and timely information consumers have, the better choices they can make. And so I think that's the path, that not that we don't need to change, that we don't dig our heels into anything, or that anything we did before was wrong. It's like there's other ways we can do it and keep evolving how we serve the consumer.
I think we also have to remember too, I agree with everything you're saying, and like we earned this problem a little bit as an industry. Not you as MLSs, but us. Like I'll put me, as I used to have a license. I've been in dining room, conference room, living rooms, met with buyers and sellers. Not all, very few is my guess, agents, very few didn't do the right things. But it does happen where they avoid this conversation. And if you're a fiduciary, you're going to put your client's interests above your own. And it's very difficult for me to agree that you're putting your client's interests above your own when you don't have a substantive conversation about who you work for and how you get paid. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have that conversation, you are avoiding your fiduciary duty, in my opinion. And I agree with you. Not all of this, and I agree with everything you're saying, but sometimes I feel like we lose sight of the fact of, as an industry, that we are somewhat complicit in this, and we have to take some personal responsibility for the actions that we've taken that have led us to here. And
like saying that you don't pay me, the seller does. My services are free.
Right.
Because that's happened.
It's a terrible thing to say. And it's not, I mean...
But we've already fixed some of that too, Keith, because even though the DOJ... And NAR made a settlement, and then the DOJ went back on it. NAR actually implemented almost every single one of those things anyway. That being one of them, you can't talk about your services being free. You have to explain that stuff. Commissions, Denee, are now public to see.
I mean, yes, but sure, you have to, air quotes, right? But how are you making sure that happens?
For sure.
Right? Yeah. Okay, yes. They put out something that said you have to have a discussion. But unless you are putting it in writing and having someone sign it, there's no way you can really know that discussion happened. And so half measures around fiduciary, I'm not okay with. We have to.
And I think, Keith, you're describing, that's why I keep saying, what's our next evolution of the industry? How do we grow? How do we evolve? How do we better serve the consumer? And I think the really important piece of why transitioning from saying your services are free is because anything free maybe doesn't quite have as much value as like being able to articulate what you do.
And it's also not true. The buyer borrows a bunch of money and then gives it to the seller, and then the seller gives it to you. So like it's not free.
But I think it's the perfect opportunity for us as an industry to really start articulating that value. And I think one of the other pieces that by way the value that MLS has provided to the marketplace is, as you were talking about the books before, now everything is on the internet. It's very easy to search and find homes, right? But the value of agents today serving a buyer is not about search and finding that house. It's about getting that house under contract and to closing.
Yeah.
And
it always has been about that. But
there was this whole other piece, but now it's being diminished that the role isn't as important because search is easy. I would say because so much more is available, getting that house, getting that contract to close is even more work because it is such a competitive, even more competitive market that more and more people have availability to see what's there.
Yeah, market inefficiencies of using some stupid book for what homes are or are not available is not a value prop, right? That's just an inefficient market. Your value prop, I agree completely, can't be the available inventory, because then that means you don't need a fiduciary, you only need a functionary. Right. Functionaries are lowly paid. I want this industry to stay, keep the ability to earn as much income as they can. In order to do that, you have to be someone who does much more than just, open doors and say, oh, there's the kitchen, right? Yeah. Like, that's not what we do. Yeah. That's like one millionth of what we do.
Let me put a kind of a pin in this one because we got a lot of other stuff to cover. Do you plan on meeting with the DOJ again? First question.
And can I go?
Do not let him go.
Come on.
No.
We'll talk about it.
Trial by
Yeah, so our goal was to just establish a relationship with the Department of Justice and eventually the Federal Trade Commission to say if there are changes happening or there's something they're considering, we'd really like to be part of those conversations because, the changes have impacts and we have the experts there that can talk about how that actually plays out in the market. So that was one side of it. But the other side that we're working on is we did hire an econometrician. You guys want to practice that?
What?
An econometrician.
Is your internet bad again? What the hell is an econometrician?
So we hired this firm to help us look at and actually provide data and information to back up where we're saying the value of the MLS, and we had the white paper. In court cases, we're looking to actually use some data and show that in a different way. So we're working with him, and I'm anticipating that we'll have that second part of our initiative. We'll be seeing some stuff here in the next little while. And with that, we'll take that back to the DOJ and sharing that with the industry as well and consumers as to really what is the value of MLS with an economic impact, or as even that executive order, pocketbook issues.
Are you going to be able to share that data publicly as well, the stuff that you're putting together? Yeah.
That is the plan. We'll publish that paper.
I just wanted to make a point that when you said nutritionist, that Keith's brain went to nutritionist, and there was a tater tot joke coming in somewhere in here. That was going to happen, but then it just, I saw his facial expressions and it just kept going. So we got past that.
But is that like an economist and if an economist and a statistician had a baby? Is that an economist?
I'll check, but I don't think so.
No. Chat GTP that stuff, Keith.
All right, hold on. You guys talk.
I had one piece of this, James, though, on another piece of that statement of interest that I just found interesting was the data that they used and what they produced. I know we definitely have been talking with our economists about what it means, because there was two parts, the statement of interest, and then there was like a 5-page data.
They're referencing the Northwest MLS quite a bit.
So that one, I've been talking with our econometrician about that one for sure.
I have the definition whenever you all are. First of all, let's start with I was right, and then I'll read it. What is an econometrician? An econometrician is an individual that uses statistics and mathematics to study, model, and predict economic principles and outcomes. Boom.
So that was the statistician and the economist had a baby.
Having a baby. I mean, not really. You don't have to be a baby of those
Just
two
drop
people.
it, Keith. Just keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll go on.
So the last part, the data, we're talking about the data.
It's
their data, and your economist is looking at the data they're using.
Yeah.
I'm sensing you don't agree with the data.
I definitely have some questions. I know our econometrician did, and so we're working to have our own information for that to be able to share. So
I'm going to make a statement and then we'll move on. I worry about any data anyone's using when they consistently use numbers for average commission rates that are so fundamentally wrong based upon, I don't know, the past 20 years of data that I've looked at. Like every time someone used the word 6%, I'm like, I've been that number since like 2001. But we can take that offline. Let's move this to a couple other questions here.
I have a question.
Yeah, go.
So you mentioned what you do as the national governance for MLSs. I think most people think that's NAR, is that NAR is the one that sort of tells, quote unquote, tells MLSs what they can or can't do. Can you unpack for us a little bit, like the difference between the two, and then what you see the future of that as things evolve with NAR and all of that stuff? Because I don't think everybody understands.
Absolutely. So NAR does MLS policy, and that's at the heart of the lawsuits and what DOJ is coming to look at. Those are things that are required if they are in an NAR MLS, then they are required to follow those rules. CMLS does not do MLS policy. We have been active in suggesting policies that be passed, or if there's somebody else is suggesting and we think there should be some changes to the language. One example was we submitted a policy on broker back office fee. that didn't actually exist of a broker getting their own data back. That was not actually a policy anywhere and required. So we crafted the language and submitted that to NAR to say we believe that brokers should get their own data back. And so now that is an official policy, but we didn't pass that.
So you're sort of, this is what I heard. It is not what you said. So clear it up for me if I screw it up. But you're sort of the voice or advocate for MLSs to NAR, the people who wake up every day thinking about how MLSs can improve and get better. And you will be the ones to try to shape and guide NAR in their decision-making in and around the trajectory of MLSs and what they do.
Yes, and then we build on top of that. So that's the government's the required. And then really the piece that CMLS brings to that is we do MLS best practices. So we have a whole resource guide of if you want to go to the next levels, how are the top MLSs? And top doesn't just mean a big MLS. It means the MLSs who are working effectively with their brokers and facilitating an efficient market, good feedback loops, customer service, all of those things that go to running an efficient and effective organization. So that's really where we focus on, but none of those are mandatory. They're
Got it.
Can I piggyback on his question?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Just to throw, what happens if there is no national governance of MLSs? Because I know there's underpinnings of this conversation with the context of everybody's getting sued because there was national policy. What happens if there is no national policy?
One, I think it's been suggested that CMLS should maybe run policy.
I've heard those rumors.
Yeah, that doesn't sound super exciting to me. That is the context of today's world. That said, it's a really tough job, right? Like I'm sure this has been on one of your podcasts, the complaint about how hard it is to work with 500 different MLSs because they all have different rules.
Never heard it.
Okay, sorry if that's new information.
What?
I occasionally hear that statement. And if you think that exists even with those rules that are there. So we do need some base structure and guidelines to run efficient marketplaces that do allow the data to transfer and get where it needs to be by the people that need to be using it, and that companies can build products that can scale on top because there is this consistency. So I do think that we need that. And I think that is a really important role that NAR does play. So if somebody's saying they should just go away and all the rules go away, I don't think that's good for industry. I don't think it's good for consumers because it helps create the efficient marketplace.
I remember when it wasn't that way. Because I remember the MLS book. So I remember when it wasn't that way. And you could have 4 bordering MLSs with different policies on everything from IDX to no data share
information.
Oh my gosh. Like you could go so far backwards in time if everybody was doing it that way. So,
which often, depending on the the MSA, where you are, you can be in a service an area where you have 2 or 3 MLSs. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 states. And you cross a bridge and you go from, Oregon to Washington, right? And all the human being who wants to buy a house or sell their house have their property marketed to the entire macro market, and the buyer wants to be able to see the entire macro market. Like they don't care about your silly little walls that you've put up and rules around your data. They just want to see everything. And
I think I want to give a shout out to at least CMLS members. I think they've been doing a really great job of talking about that. And their tone all the time is how do we better support our subscribers, the brokers and agents, make sure they're as informed and they have as much information as the consumer. So I think there's a big shout out to that has been a big focus of MLSs, and we've made a lot of progress.
In the 25 years I've been in the industry, it's gotten so much better.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I first started selling houses, I was like, I have to join how many? Just to sell in the Bay Area?
Can I add one more piece to that? Because it's this really interesting dynamic. If people say the MLS, like it's the Oz behind the curtain in Wizard of Oz or something, right? Yeah. Like an MLS is made up of brokers and agents. Those are the ones saying yes to some of these changes. And so I think that's why it's so important that the people that are on the boards of an MLS are the most informed, educated, and really forward thinking about no walled gardens there. We don't want them coming over the hill to sell in our market. We have to think about, as you said, Keith, what the consumer wants. They want the information. They just want their house out. So it's this kind of, we can't blame the MLS because the MLS is brokers and agents. and we just got to go to that next level of understanding how we get there.
You mentioned the most informed and educated for being there. There's a good segue there for NAR to follow that same path with all of their committees. Anyways, do you think that I'm going to piggyback this question two ways, and I'm sure Keith will have a follow-up. So, one, do you think there's a world where contractual offers of compensation is gone in the MLS? And my follow-up with that is, what are the biggest issues in addition to that potentially that you see MLS is facing?
So one, I think it is an option. That's sort of been mine, saying worst case scenario as a result of these is that's what happens.
Okay.
I think MLS still exists and survives and thrives in that space because they bring so much more to the market. It was that MLS was cooperation and compensation. I think it's cooperation and the compilation, right? It's still about having that whole market information and the network effects of having all the available properties for sale. So I think it still continues on. I think the challenge is, as I said, your agents are providing a professional service that is very important. Navigating a real estate transaction, I'm not a big believer of not having representation on both sides of it. I just, my finance background from investing to banking to whatever, I think it's important consumers have representation. So I still think they get paid. And if that information goes dark as to how and where, and we're not doubling down on getting the information out, I think it still happens. And we're going to be whack-a-mole or kicking the can down the road because we haven't truly solved the issue that maybe the DOJ has, is what I'm reading through that statement of interest in our conversation. So I think as an industry, not everyone maybe is excited about promoting what those amounts are, but I think that's where kind of our work as an industry to say, if it's better for the consumer, then it's better for us, and how do we really do that to support them?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've done a lot of podcasts on this topic, and you're the first one that maybe hasn't said it, but the first one that made it through my incredibly thick skull, that like the current solution that they're proposing is to just have some piece of paper that one human is going to talk to another human about. That isn't actually more transparency, right? That's a document that one person is going to explain to another. And to tie back into Countrywide, we had people explaining documents to other people, and I'm picking on Countrywide.
Heartbeat loans, but yeah, that's not disconnected.
Yeah, but like those were one person talking to another person about some documentation, and then they signed it, right? So your thought track around widening the aperture on information and just letting the information speak, I think is interesting, and not something I personally hear enough people talking about.
You know, a comment I'm going to make on this, just I think it's relevant to it, and then we'll get to the final questions here. You know, my friend Ed Zorn has floated this idea of a seller concession field, which I think is an interesting piece, because as I just mentioned earlier in the podcast, concessions are literally what we do in business every day, and every single aspect of ordering. I ordered some steaks online. They had a 50% discount if I ordered by 5. Like, I mean, it's just literally part of what we do. I worry, it's more of a statement. I mean, you have some comments on this. I worry about taking this out of the MLS or making it just even decoupled, where a buyer who's already strapped for cash has to sit down and figure out what they can afford and choose representation based upon the cost of what they have. And my reference to the lawyer joke, because it's relevant, would be like having to use a public defender versus getting your own lawyer. Now we're going to get hate mail. Yeah, but I don't care, because I think it's relevant. Like if the whole idea is to create an opportunity for someone to do something infrequently, like they do now, 2 or 3 times in your life, you'll buy a house. It's actually become even less based upon the cost. The reason why the system has been set up this way, and people just forget this, was part of the reason it's designed that way, is so that the buyer has representation in a very complicated transaction. So it doesn't end up in a frickin' lawsuit, which is the 2 most common ways to end up in a lawsuit on a real estate deal. Unrepresented buyer, and by the way, the other one, dual agency. And if you get rid of buyer representation, what are you going to see more of? dual agency, that there's not mechanisms in place. Like the DOJ is just not understanding the marketplace.
I mean, it'd be a little weird. It'd be like the DOJ saying, hey, how about you just go into a murder trial unrepresented? How's that sound? Right? Like, they wouldn't let you do it. They would not let you do it.
Their argument's going to be, though, Keith, that that this will create more of a marketplace for different rates of representation. And I'll argue back, that's been there forever.
But I think, James, that goes back to where I was saying they want a more informed consumer, right? So the consumer we as an industry say that it's always been negotiable, and I believe it has. I think the consumer maybe didn't know as much about that before. That's my take on it, and an opportunity again. If we're getting more information out to them, that better equips them to do that.
So the three of us are agreeing that disclosures up front and clearly stating that all of this stuff can be negotiable, like that you believe that that's an approach that is a good balanced approach.
I think so, because it retains the pro-consumer benefits of our marketplace, right? It allows those people who probably need the representation the most. And my background from being in banking and finance, really working with these people, starting to build their credit and their savings to do this down payment. I mean, that's been my experience in this process in the lending. They really need it, and to think that it can. Even the evolution of our industry, it used to just be listing, right? Then we evolved to sub-agency, and then we evolved to this next step. And so maybe what is that next version of what we do? And I think, James, I just want to mention the company you're doing with Raise, and how you've worked to, if no one's seen it, like that, it's really documenting all of those things that you do to get from your consumer from that contract to close. And that's where what we were talking earlier of saying that something's free. It's not valuing what that stretch is and how much work goes into it, and really how that does protect, inform, and support consumers getting to home ownership. It's so important.
Yeah, we've been saying for months or almost a year now that your buyer consultation of today better look like your listing presentation or consultation of yesterday, right? So when you go on a listing presentation, you got to talk about money. So because you got to talk about money, you're very prepared to show your value, show your work, right? These are all the different things I do. Here's the things I do that most people don't. This is my unique selling proposition. You do all that stuff in a listing conversation. You better start doing that in a buyer consultation, because it's coming. Whether or not you want to, in my opinion, that is the future. 100%. And so you better be very comfortable.
I think it also elevates our industry, Keith. I think a lot of conversations about the professionalism, I think that's a huge piece for us as well.
Yeah.
Candidly, the professional ones have been doing some version of this already. Right. They're not going to have to revolutionize their business. They're just going to have to add some pages that need to be signed now that maybe they weren't using, and tweak their conversation a bit. But the professional agents have been doing this all along anyway.
Keith, take us home. I know we got to wrap this up. So
this is what we end every single podcast with. If you were an agent or brokerage, what is the one thing you would implement into your business today to help you in 2024?
I think it goes to what we were just talking about, to really getting super comfortable and confident in articulating your value, and share that with the consumer. Not arrogant and like, this is what I have, but like really sharing what it is that you do, because it is so important, and be able to share the value. That's what it is. That just becomes part of your listing agent presentation, as you said, your buyer's agency presentation, and just be proud of the role that you play in helping make homeownership happen.
Yeah, and what you're really anchoring into there, I think, is change, right? And get super comfortable with change, because none of us, the three of us, we're all guessing, right, on how this is going to land. Eventually, we'll know how it lands, and no one that you talk to thinks it will be like it was the day before it lands, right? Like, it's going to be different. And so I know, like, lamenting the fact that this change is kind of like, why are we changing? This is worse for the consumer. It's an affordability head, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. We lost, right? We got sued. We lost. It's going to, this change is coming most likely. So be prepared.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more.
Denee, thanks for being here. We really appreciate your insights into walking into the Department of Justice building with the heat turned up and everything else. So we'll put that in our tagline to get clicks and things.
Yes.
That's what you do on the internet.
Take me with you on the phone.
All right.
I promise.
Bad idea.
It'll be fun.
I really appreciate being on and having the conversation. This was fun.
Good. We would love to have you back, especially as you have more conversations with them, because we're trying to get as much information out to the industry as possible. So we appreciate you being as transparent as you can. I know you're walking a fine line with all of that, but I know our listeners appreciate that too.
Absolutely.
So,
thank you.
Thanks, Denee.
We'll and by the way, whenever I see you at the next event, I want to hear more about that bank robbery. So that being said, Denee, thanks again. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. Hit that subscribe button. Trust us, it's the best thing any of us will accomplish today.